Warning: the following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to another riveting edition of Hot Takes with Billy Biz. Of course, whatever you're doing right now, if you're driving, pull over. If you're on your phone taking a poop, hold on to it for just a sec. Go over to iTunes, to Spotify, to Stitcher, to whatever weird service you listen to this that I've never heard of. Rate and review. That way other people can find it, because they're going to want to find episodes like today, where we are finally talking 2018's Solo, a Star Wars story. And joining me is my old friend. You guys may know him from 97.7 QLZ, the voice that God created to talk to us all, Mo Lightning.
I gotta say, this is weird. Everybody knows you as Billy Business. I knew you as Billy A. Patterson. And can you remind me, what does the A stand for?
The A stands for absolutely glad I don't have to think of words like that every single episode anymore. And there are a handful of people that used to listen to our old show, Con Smash, and we used to do a segment on the show called the Dorkly Dispute, which we would have opposing opinions on films. I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit. I think I'm going to break kayfabe. There were a handful of times where we actually were pretty aligned on a lot of things, and for the sake of entertainment, one of us would take the other side and we would just battle to the death.
And battles they were. I don't know if this is an understatement, but Billy can get rather passionate.
It's one of those things where it's like, this is why I knew, besides just physical conditioning, that I couldn't be a professional wrestler, was because even though I knew at times I was playing a part, I would legitimately get hot at you when you would come at me for an opinion like I didn't really even care about. There were a couple times. I think some of our Fantastic Four debates or X-Men debates would get a little unwieldy.
I feel like if Christian Bale was ever going to be a podcaster, he would be you.
Yeah, I would lose my temper a few times. I've chilled out since then, but the reason I bring all that up is, you know, off camera, a lot of times just in the car or at work at the time, we would talk about movies, and you have such a great mind for movies, and you see not just movies, but the world very differently than a lot of people. And it was always kind of like, oh, you know, if we weren't putting on a show, this would actually be an interesting show. That's what this one is, you know, and I'm glad that, you know, we're getting to Solo, a Star Wars story, because we were talking beforehand, I don't remember, but in my memory, this is like the only Star Wars movie that you and I have not really discussed at length.
And I'm very curious to see what these thoughts are betwixt you and myself, because you and I generally have a lot of the same feelings about the Star Wars universe, which is probably already damning me from some of the people listening here. But I'm curious to see if you and I are on the same page on this one or not.
Yeah, this one's an interesting one. I think a lot of my listeners, you know, that like some of the episodes that we've talked about, like Justice League, there's a lot of backstage drama that kind of bleeds over. So let's set up a little bit about Solo for those of you who either don't know or don't remember, because the backstage drama hit this one pretty hard. So in February of 2017, they started filming Solo with Chris Miller and Phil Lord. Do I have that right? Did I transpose those? Yeah, Phil Lord, Chris Miller. Yeah, those guys. They're great. You may know them from the Lego movie, from 21 and 22 Jump Street. They are notorious for taking ideas that are, I'm not going to say bad, but shouldn't work, and then they make them into really good movies for the most part, at least crowd-pleasing movies. They came along and they started filming in February. Their take on Solo in June. Now, this is where things get interesting. Very publicly, Lucasfilm, and specifically Kathleen Kennedy, announced that they had left the project due to creative differences. Now, a lot of this is rumor. It's conjecture. It's he said, she said. But the overall consensus from a lot of people that worked on this film is that Lord and Miller were turning this into a straight on comedy film as opposed to Lucasfilm, who kind of had the idea like, oh, they can bring a humorous element to otherwise a fairly straightforward Star Wars story.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good recap. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So once we got to this point where they were publicly gone, it was said that Ron Howard, who turned down the job of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, he was going to come in and reshoot. I think there were scheduled like maybe 5 or 6 weeks of reshoots. It ended up being that he reshot about 70% of the entire film. This made Lawrence Kasdan very happy, who wrote the script, because Phil Miller and Chris Lord, they were the ones that they were very into improv, and they didn't like to do a lot of coverage. So coverage, if you're not familiar, that's doing the same scene over and over, but getting different shots, different angles. So when you go into editing, you can cut around different things because you have something to cover it with. But like, Irvin Kershner, who did Empire Strikes Back, he knew exactly what he wanted, and there was no coverage. And Lucas didn't like that at the time for Empire Strikes Back, because Lucas likes to play in the editing room. And I think Lucasfilm with Solo realized, like, hey, they're making a movie, not quite the tone we wanted, and we don't have any coverage to try to like fix this in editing. Ron Howard comes in, reshoots 70% of this movie, and that's a big deal. This was around the time, I don't know if you remember, where also Colin Trevorrow was kicked off of Episode 9. This was going on. It kind of seemed, do you remember this time where Star Wars kind of seemed like, man, there's something going on over there?
They were really, it's almost like Universal and their movie division trying to create this movie franchise, that they were, Star Wars and Lucasfilm, looking too far ahead rather than living in the now.
Yeah, it was definitely, and Bob Iger has said so much, maybe not as bluntly, but in different interviews and in his book, it was like, hey man, we got this property, we were very excited. What do you do when you have Star Wars? And maybe we went at it just a little too aggressively right out the box. So as this is being kind of reshot, then Star Wars The Last Jedi comes out, and it's mixed. It's mixed at best. It's still a $1 billion grosser. Like, let's call a spade a spade. Like, this movie made money, and any narrative that you read by anybody that says it was a failure, that's just them trying to prove a very twisted point that's not true. But the truth is, it left people a little stunned. There were people who loved it, and there were people who absolutely hated it. And although I don't 100% believe it, a lot of the performance of Solo was kind of in doubt at that point because people were so turned off by Last Jedi. So when Solo did come out, I mean, this did not perform. Straight up. It got slammed by Deadpool 2. It got slammed by Avengers. And a lot of people saying, I'm not going to see that because I'm mad at what Disney's doing to Star Wars. A lot of factors in that almost the movie became second fiddle. And what people probably don't remember about Solo, it has an approval rating of 70% on Rotten Tomatoes with an A- cinema score. People who saw it liked it. But that's not the story around this movie. No,
absolutely not. I do, without diving into all the details yet, I think that 70% score is a very fair reflection of Solo, which to me overall is a very fun film, but the glaring holes are what keeps it down.
I'm with you. I think as much as I do love Solo, there are things that don't work about it, but I want to ask you, especially now because I feel like we're also just catching up as friends. Going into this movie, this is now May of last year, did any of this kind of backstage drama kind of spook you? Because also remember, we were all waiting for a trailer forever. That thing didn't drop until February, which was 3 months before the movie came out. Was the first time we saw any footage of this. What were your thoughts going into Solo and then coming out of it on, I'm assuming you saw it opening weekend.
So going in, I don't want to say I went in closed-minded, but I definitely went in a little less than enthusiastic, especially not just for Star Wars movies, but it was a prequel, and I'm not a huge fan of the idea of prequels because you already know that some of these characters are going to survive, and to me that takes a generation of enjoyment away from it because you already know no matter what peril they get in, those characters are still going to live to see another day. And to me, that just takes a little bit away. So I wasn't excited to begin with. But then reading and hearing and learning all this backstage drama, I'm thinking this movie is going to be a bust. This movie is going to be an absolute disaster. And I watched the movie pretty quickly because that's what loyal nerds do. I watched the movie that opening weekend and I walked out and I'm shaking my head. I go, that was a fun movie. It wasn't a great one, but I walked out liking it better than I expected.
Yeah, you know what? I'm in the same boat as you. I had already bought tickets for opening night, and my wife, like the week of, was like, nah, I don't know why you bought two. I'm not going. And I was like, what, really? She's like, yeah. She's like, I don't do the a Star Wars story movies. Like, you're on your own. I was like, all right. So I almost didn't go. But I did end up, someone was like, yeah, I've got nothing else to do. It was like, remembering how hard it was to get those Force Awakens tickets with Fandango crashing and then like trying to find anybody to go see Solo with me on opening night IMAX, like free ticket. You don't even have to pay me back. Just come with me.
It's amazing how far it went, where going to a Star Wars movie was an event and then Solo rolls around and you have to drag people to it.
Yeah, it was quite the culture shock. But I was with you. I was like, all right, this is probably going to be pretty bad. At the time, I've since really softened up on it. But at the time, I did not like Rogue One at all. And so I was like, well, this, another Star Wars story. But like you said, loyal nerd, like I can't not see a Star Wars
right.
movie. And I remember just being so pleasantly surprised by it the entire time. I was waiting for it to be awful. And by the way, the first 10 minutes of this movie, I was like, oh no. And then it was like the anti-Fantastic Four, because I feel like when they did the like 1 year later thing, that's when the movie got really good for me. But that first 10 minutes, I was like, okay, I guess I'll give it to the weird snake centipede woman thing. Like, at least it's a pup. Yeah, it's like, by the way, it's like Disney had just done Infinity War with Proxima Midnight. It was like, you guys couldn't like coordinate a little bit?
Nope. I'm surprised they didn't have more Proxima references.
Right?
Fantasia, Proxima.
So ultimately, though, like once it got like that part was fine, and did you roll your eyes at the I don't have any people? All right, Han single by himself is your new name. I was like, oh no.
That was a big thing to me, this movie, and the amount of foreshadowing that it not so subtly threw at us, and just the over-explaining of everything where, Han Solo, I didn't need to know where his name came from, and now I actually feel worse knowing where it was created.
Let's talk about that, because I think that is one of the biggest criticisms of this movie is it's the good old I didn't need that kind of criticism, and I'm not going to say that I 100% disagree, because I do think there are things in this movie that people make a big deal about that I don't get. Like, one of the things I remember walking into work the next day, and I was like, I really, really liked that. And someone was like, yeah, they over-explain everything. He's like, oh, the name? He's like, yeah, but also like him getting his blaster. And I was like, I don't know, that seemed like such a sure. Like, he's got to get a gun somewhere. If it's the gun that he has for the next 20 years, all right, like that, it didn't stop the movie. He needed a gun, No,
I don't know if anything stopped the movie. And I think that's kudos to the many, many directors of this movie just to keep that going. But they tried to make the dice a thing.
That is true.
And of course the Kessel Run. That to me was my biggest disappointment. That I didn't want to see that ever in my life. As crazy as that sounds, I wanted that to be one of those urban legends, one of those myths that we're not really quite sure who was right, because he always corrects everybody when they have the wrong time quoted. And just like, to me, that would have been a great legend to never fully know how it went down.
I agree, but I also... I'm conflicted, because here's where I stand. I'm with you, and I loved the idea. It's kind of like, the whole Beggar's Canyon races that we know Luke used to take some form of a speeder or, a motorcycle or whatever, and kind of like drag raced around this very dangerous canyon. But we never saw him do it. And especially now, the odds of ever seeing Luke do that, I don't know. Maybe in the Obi-Wan Disney Plus series, he's, Obi-Wan's just sitting on the cliff watching Luke race like a crazy person.
No, at this point, Luke is, he's the one yelling at the speeders going too fast around the corner. Damn you kids!
Yeah, old B1. But... So I'm with you. I did like the I did like the Kessel Run as kind of like this easy, but at the same time, like, that's one of those things where when you watch at least A New Hope, it's such a throwaway line that I feel like the fandom made it a bigger thing than it actually is. And if you're gonna do it, I feel like it's a really exciting sequence. Like, it's done very well. I love the part of, it's kind of sad because that monster didn't do anything. He was just chilling there. Someone breaks into his house and then kills him.
Minding his own damn business, yeah.
It's still like a really cool sequence. At least I thought. I was like, wow. And what I really appreciate about it, especially in hindsight after, you finish the movie, you're like, oh, like what they typically stick me with as like, all right, here we go. Third act, big action sequence. They kind of did the Captain America Civil War, Doctor Strange thing where the big fight is actually in your second act.
I get that. Going back to the Kessel Run, I have two mentalities of it. One, it's Disney, it's Lucasfilm. I'm sure there's still an idea somewhere in the back of their heads to continue this solo prequel franchise, either on screen or now with Disney Plus. So if you're going to expand that lore, then you probably want to save something for the future. And maybe... who knows, maybe there's a freedom now that you got so much of that out of the way. That's one mentality. But the other one is, I guess my issue with all of these explanations is that here's the blaster, here's the dice, here's the Millennium Falcon, here's the Kessel Run. Like, everything was explained in this one movie, which means the next 20 years, Han Solo didn't do much.
Well, it's 10 years.
Whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? It's like everything was so influential in this 2-week time.
Sure. And part of me does wonder, because I don't know. I truly don't know. I wonder if any of the reshoots involved getting the Falcon at the end as opposed to saving that Sabacc game for another movie, because they knew, like, we may not get another shot at this. Because at that point, you have to, like, you probably have at least early tracking numbers, or, they can gauge, you get some sleeper hits or some big disappointments sometimes, but they had to have known, like, this thing's kind of in trouble at this point. Like, I wonder if it was a conscious effort, like, get it in now because it may not come back.
That's possible. Now, let me ask you this here. Do you think Disney will continue on with this general cast in a future solo production of some sort?
Yes and no. I don't think it'll be like, I don't think like Solo 2 is coming to Disney Plus. But could I see a Mandalorian-esque, like, Crimson Dawn miniseries about, like, a crime empire, and Kira shows up and there's more Maul and that kind of stuff? Absolutely, I do.
And the reason I ask is only because at this point, let's say they do, hypothetically, do a Solo 2, wherever they may release it. Do you feel bad for that director and that writing team behind this? Because... now they don't have anything tying them down to that, oh, we have to explain this. We have to show where he got his butt. We don't have to do that. But Disney obviously has very high expectations of a connection to the universe. How do you feel that director would have to handle that?
Well, I mean, I guess that's kind of what I think is like, to me, I would think just the way you're talking, that would be exactly what would get you more excited, is that like the shackles are off in the sense that where this has to end, because this has to end. The last sequence of any, like, here's the Han Solo 2. It has to end with him having a shipment where the Empire comes, boards the Falcon. He has to dump it. Then he has to go back to Jabba, and Jabba's like, hey, you have 24 hours to get me my money back. That's where it has to end, because that's where we see him first in A New Hope. So anything before that, you're kind of open to play with at that point. I want to see him go back to find Kira one more time and realize, there's still like a little pocket missing where he finally realizes she's kind of left him behind, and that's where he becomes a little bit of the jaded guy that we meet in A New Hope.
Well, I would hope that they're able to approach it as such, and their ideas presented will be ones that Disney approves, because obviously whoever, if this would ever happen, has to take over that Solo branding is definitely an uphill battle after the fiasco of the first one.
So let's talk about, we're talking about if they would do something else, and Alden Ehrenreich, he's still contracted to be Han Solo again. I get the criticism. People are like, well, it's not Harrison Ford. Well, you can't get more obvious than that. It's just impossible. I think there are moments where, you can kind of squint and you can see a little young Harrison, or you can hear an inflection. But for the most part, Alden makes it his own. And for the most part, I'm 100% fine with him doing that.
Yeah. I had no problem with him in that role whatsoever. If I had any issue, it was more the writing or whatever, and I'm sure we can get to that. But he, as an actor, Alden, I thought, did a good job. He had a lot of good mannerisms of a young Harrison Ford, and yeah, it didn't sound like him all the time, but me 20 years ago to me 10 years ago to me now sounds a little bit different too.
Yeah, I see how it could be easy to get hung up on it, but I do think he did as well as he could. There were those rumors, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, that his performance just wasn't up to snuff, and they brought some acting coaches in to kind of help during shooting. Maybe. I don't think that would be the first time that's ever happened. That's not to say he's not talented. But one thing that I really like on this take of Han, and a lot of people don't, and I get it, but they're like, well, this Han is he's much more naive. He's much goofier than he appears, 10 years later in A New Hope, where he's such a badass. He's just such a, like a scoundrel. He's such this, that. And I guess here's where I stand on Han Solo. When you look at A New Hope, I think a lot of people misinterpret the character of Han as like this guy who's just oozing cool and, just like the jock kind of, the high school jock, the football player, like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. But that movie tells you, like, hey, this guy, like, puts up a very tough front, but he's actually kind of a cornball. A New Hope goes out of its way a couple times to tell you that. Like, he's just kind of like, you never heard of the Millennium Falcon? It's the fastest ship. She's fast enough for you, old man. Then the minute they walk away, he's like, ooh, Chewie, did you hear that? We finally got a ride. Oh, thank God. Like, he's very clearly putting on this front. Even so, he's like, Chewie, you big baby, in the Death Star. And then he turns the corner trying to be a hero, sees a bunch of stormtroopers and runs away screaming. Like, Han's always kind of been a little bit of a goofball. And so I kind of feel like this was like the perfect characterization of it.
And you actually see hints of that in Solo, which I give them credit for, especially the refinery. Where they're being confronted by the other gang of marauders before you get the big reveal of who the marauders are and whatnot. So you see Han is trying that tough act, where Beckett, Woody Harrelson's Beckett, is saying, oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And then Harrison walks up, or Harrison, Solo walks up and kind of does, well, we have 30, 40, whatever number of people on that ship ready to go. Like, he was doing that tough facade that didn't work out for him. Then he takes a step back. Hey, go ahead. Here, you take your plan. But over a course of 10 or so years, he just got better at bluffing.
100% agreed. And I that's why, like, to me, it kind of, this Han reminds me of the Han from especially like Return of the Jedi, where they're like, be quiet. He's like, hey, it's me. Like, you know, like just kind of that return to like Han is ultimately like a good guy, and he's a sweetheart. He's naive. Does he get a little selfish? Absolutely he does. And I think, you know, kind of to take it back to where we were before, I think that's where we would start to see any like sort of growth in character growth or change in any sort of sequel or follow-up that they did. Was kind of like, okay, you know, by the end of this movie, he's still kind of, you know, out for himself, but he does give the coaxium to Enfys Nest, which ends up being kind of the seeds of what will be the rebellion soon. But I just like the idea of like having one more confrontation with Kira, you know, between the end of this movie and the beginning of A New Hope, that really seals the deal. Like, there's nobody out there who's got your back except you.
And that's the thing. I rewatched the movie last night because one of my very first complaints about this movie upon seeing it the first time was how forgettable a lot of it really was. And I enjoyed watching it, but 2 weeks later, I already forgot a lot of what happened in this movie. So I wanted to revisit it right before this recording so I could be obviously better educated to talk about it, better refreshed. And this time around, compared to the original movies and then the newest series of movies that Harrison Ford was a part of, I feel that the entire time, his entire life, Han Solo was looking for family. And it's easy to be out for yourself when you keep losing family. In this case, we saw, you know, Beckett turn on him. We saw Kira decide that she's going to stay on her path. And really the only person that stuck around was Chewbacca. So yeah, it's going to be easy for him to only look out for himself and Chewbacca. But ultimately, like, you know, like a kid of a broken family in real life, all they want is somebody to love them and to love back and actually feel that security around people. And I think that's what you got in the original trilogy, and hence why, you know, things are a little bit different. And it's not the Han Solo we thought he was going to be 10 years ago, because he was still looking for a lot in his life.
I think you 100% nailed the theme of family. And, you know, he starts and he's part of this, you know, like this kind of almost like this like Charles Dickens-esque, you know, like he or this like Les Miserables, like he's part of this like gang that he can't get out of. And it's just, you're right. I think Kira is kind of like his North Star that he's always pointed to. And the entire time, all he's trying to do is get back to this one person, and everybody screws him along the way. And that's why I say, like, I feel like he gets that by the end, you know, killing Beckett. That's not easy for him. And to me, here, you want a hot take? I think killing Beckett is a much bigger signifier of who Han is as a person or who he's becoming than that stupid Greedo scene that people can't get over from A New Hope, that is not as important as everyone thinks it is.
How dare you?
You're right. I love that idea of we see Han and he's not broken yet. And by the end, I still don't think he's like 100% broken, but he's certainly starting to learn those hard truths. And that's why, like, I would love to have one more movie where it's just kind of nailed into him, like, hey, this isn't going to happen for you. You're going to be, the best you can do now is just to make money for yourself and do what you want.
Really, absolutely. And I would like to see that continuation should they go that route, because it makes for a greater, more redeeming story arc for Han Solo, who, yeah, I know a lot of people just want that same badass Han Solo from start to finish, but to me, that's not realistic. We all grow, we all learn over time, we all have our ups, we all have our downs, and if Han just sinks a little bit further in the next presentation, and then by the time you get to A New Hope and the follow-up movies, then you start seeing that redemption in him, and then the guy becomes even more badass because he's able to conquer those demons.
100% agree. Let's talk about some of those supporting characters, those family characters. Let's start with Kira. I think that's like a thankless role in the sense that she spends a lot of the movie kind of like having to kind of hide this secret of who she is and what she's doing. And I think Emilia Clarke, you know, she hasn't had the best luck with these big franchise projects outside of Game of Thrones. That being said, I thought she was so much better here than what she did with Sarah Connor in Terminator. And that's a little apples oranges. It could be different scripts or whatever, but I just feel like I was like, wow, like she's come a long way. And I ended up really enjoying the character of Kira, and I felt bad for her in the sense that, like, at the end, you know, when she's kind of stuck with Crimson Dawn, I didn't want her to be, even though I love Leia so much. And I'm like, it goes all the way back to my Smallville days where I'm like, ooh, I really like Lana, but I know she's not the one that Clark's going to end up with. So how invested do I get with her, you know?
That's funny. I was thinking Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane, but it's true. It's absolutely true. I appreciated Emilia Clarke more the second viewing and further viewing since then. Because the first time around, I thought she was a little cold, a little stiff at times, but I also didn't know that twist at the end with her sticking with Crimson Dawn and her being the right-hand woman to Darth Maul seemingly moving forward. So, you know, I didn't get it the first time until that twist. Second time around, I'm seeing a lot more conflict in her, and I give her a lot of credit.
Yeah, I think she was great. A very underappreciated performance in that movie. But it, like I said, like it's kind of the downfall of the movie for her performance in the sense that, yeah, you don't really get to see the nuances of what she's doing until the movie's over, you know? The other one that everyone was very excited about, myself included, was Lando being a part of the movie, Donald Glover. Thoughts on Lando in this movie?
You know, I was amused heavily. You know, I think where Alden had an issue of trying to live up to the charismatic Harrison Ford, Donald Glover somehow living up to Billy D. Williams surprised me. I don't know if it did me any favors towards the Lando character himself, but I liked their interaction, and he, to me, did feel like a young Billy D. Williams.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm torn on this performance because, one, he's in itself in the bubble of Solo: A Star Wars Story. It's a very fun, very charming character, and it is kind of this great foil. I absolutely crack up every time he's kind of doing his little, like, his journal or his book on the Falcon. Like, that's so great. In the greater Star Wars universe, more so to me than Han Solo, there is a slight disconnect between this Lando and like Billy D. Williams Lando. I don't know. It just seems like, again, maybe there's one more adventure or one more story with Han and Lando, because if that's the last place that we leave Han and Lando, and then the next time they see each other is Empire Strikes Back, it just feels like there's a little missing. Like, he's a little too charming in this one, and Billy D's a lot more straight-laced later on down the road. Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely makes sense. But I'm okay with them not trying to cram even more in this one to break down the relationship or break down spirits. I think with our idea of a Solo continuation, if Han Solo's beat down, why not do the same thing to Lando? And maybe that's where the breakup happens, where Lando goes a little bit more establishment at the end of the next product, and Han doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, I really enjoy his performance. I don't know if I'd want a whole Lando movie or a Lando show after this by himself, but I think Lando is like the Hulk for me in MCU. I don't know if I want a whole Hulk movie again, but I think they're doing fantastic putting him in other projects, and I would love to see Lando pop up again there's part of me that hopes or kind of thinks, wouldn't it be weird to see Lando and like Obi-Wan together? You know, just like little random pairings. Cause I do think that he's just such a spice, and it is such a fun performance, but Billy D again, and who knows, you could be right. It could just be like, 15 some odd years have gone by between the end of this movie and then Empire Strikes Back. He could just be a slightly different guy. He just seems much like a much more of a caricature. I know a lot of people have said like Donald Glover almost does like the SNL impression of Lando for this movie. And I kind of see that.
Oh, I see it too. But character growth, if we can expect it from the main character, to me, we should be able to expect it from the others. And there is 10 years is a long gap of time for anybody. I talked about how I sound different 10 years ago. There's a lot different 10 years ago. So for me personally, I like the idea of not knowing exactly where he goes. But if we are getting that Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor series on Disney Plus, maybe we expand a little bit more in Donald Glover's world.
Yeah, and there's definitely more to be told. I actually think, as stupid as it is on paper and arguably stupid in the actual movie, I think he did a very dramatic like turn when L3 blows up on the planet or whatever, gets killed. Can you call it getting killed? But whatever. He sells it. He does a really good job, and I definitely think the drama is there. There's some cool stuff. But I'll tell you, Star Wars has kind of dropped the ball on Lando every chance it's gotten. And I'm a little worried for episode 9, just because when you think about like Return of the Jedi, this is a little bit tangential, but I was listening to another podcast where they talk about Return of the Jedi. It's like, I would have loved if Return of the Jedi, instead of Han and Nien and Nub in the Millennium Falcon, if it was Han and Lando, and Han still didn't trust Lando. Like if there was still like, that was the closing the gap on that relationship. I just feel like Lando's always been kind of like the cherry on top, but he's never had his own ice cream sundae to support it.
And so basically what you said is you wanted a scene of grumpy old Star Wars men.
Yes, I want to see them on the boat fishing. I want the whole thing. Another performance that I actually think it's good for what it is Harrison, or not Harrison. Why do we keep saying Harrison Ford when we don't mean Harrison Ford?
Well, maybe that's the problem with that's the problem with the movie right there, is that they tried to bring back a character that is obviously Harrison Ford's.
What I meant was Woody Harrelson Ford as Beckett. And I remember when this casting came out, I thought, what a strange kind of elixir this is going to be, having Woody Harrelson, who really, I'm sorry, can only play Woody Harrelson in Star Wars. Like that's I thought the character Beckett was great. I liked what he added. I think Han needed a character like that, kind of guiding him and teaching him, but also teaching him by screwing him. I thought he was good. I don't think he was bad. I don't think he was great. I think he was exactly what the story called for.
I liked him better upon future viewings of it. The first time I was distracted by the Woody Harrellisms, but he's charismatic. He's very easygoing and loose, yet contained and restricted when he needs to, and it's business. And that's kind of what we got from Han Solo later on as a character in the original movies. So I actually think now the casting makes more sense than I did back then. Yeah,
it just, you know what? I was scrolling through the TV channels the other day, and Hunger Games was on TNT, and I was like, oh, I have a hunch someone watched this movie, was like, Woody Harrelson is great in that mentor with a little bit of his own problems kind of role. Let's just see if we can get him. But you're right. He does. He almost has the disadvantage of having like Tandy Newton with him, because she's so great and she gets yanked from us so quickly because, like you said, the story is kind of trying to get Han, like anytime he's acquainted with the family, they're taken away from him at some point. And, you got to build this little small crew with Han, but she was so great in the 10 minutes that she had that I was so disappointed when it was like, oh, she's gone already.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Now, one thing I will say that I really did enjoy, this can't not be talked about. Maybe you had it in your notes, maybe not, but Chewbacca. If all the explanations that we were going to get in this movie and origins of his quirks and personality, his meeting with Chewbacca to me was outstanding.
Yeah, I love the fact that Chewie, by the way, there was I don't know if it ever got shot, but it was in the script for Revenge of the Sith that a 8-year-old Han Solo would have been on Kashyyyk with Chewbacca, and let's all be thankful that didn't make it into the final cut. I loved their first scene. I also loved that Han speaks Wookiee, which was it was so dumb, but also really fun at the same time, that I was like, yeah, that makes sense that he would,
Well, it's a little out of left field, but at least he justifies it by saying, I know a little. So at least he's like, oh, no, I speak Wookiee very well, or whatever. No, it was simple. Chewbacca still didn't quite trust him as they're trying to break out, but I like it. And throughout the movie Solo, you start seeing them bond a little bit more as it goes on. And if nothing else, this movie absolutely nailed, to me, the Han Solo Chewbacca dynamic.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there were times where they were, I don't know, the only part of Chewbacca's story in this movie that I was like, that's kind of weird, and then they drop it, was helping to free the other Wookiee prisoners on the Kessel mines. And then it's like, all right, bye, Chewie, thanks. And then 5 minutes later, Chewie's back oh, you're done. Oh, okay. They build it up as this big dramatic moment, and then it it ends up being nothing. I'm like, that was just kind of a weird detour. This movie does that a couple times where they really set something up, and then it's like, but don't worry about it. Never mind. We're not going to do that,
Yeah, it's almost like they wanted to do a whole series of deleted scenes of Chewbacca, emancipating all of his brethren and some of the slaves there, just to then link it back to the main movie. And they're like, we don't need that anymore.
Yeah, I full disclosure, I have not watched any of the special features for this movie. Maybe there is more to this scene. Maybe it's exactly what you said, but as it stands in the cut, you're just like, oh, all right. Okay. I mean, there's so much happening in that sequence anyways that it's not horribly distracting, but you're right. This was a tough,
to me, it's odd that Chewbacca is showing that he's going to do the right thing. There's a bond right there, and there's a very, some would say subtle, some would say not so subtle, clue that Chewbacca is a good guy, not just because we're told he's a good guy, but because he does also want to do the right thing. He's not just about the money. But that scene ends with a huge focus on the robot that Lando may or may not be in love with. We get that big scene rather than the continuation and explanation of the character that we have seen many times afterwards.
And to go back to your point, and again, I just want a blanket statement. I really do love this movie. I have a blast with it. But again, to your point, there's a couple manufactured, there's some things that they over-explain that you're like, oh, okay, sure. And then some that you're like, huh? The dice being one of them, where it's let's take something maybe 3 people noticed from A New Hope, reverse engineer it. The other one being the sound of the nav computers, because now L3 is in the Millennium Falcon. I never noticed that sound before, or at least never consciously thought about it. I've even watched the originals after that. It's oh yeah, I guess that's that sound. It just went out of its way to and now she's part of the ship. It's not oh, cool. You're really? Oh, okay. That to me, that was just a strange moment.
I'm trying to find any follow-up, and maybe of something I don't know, but did the Millennium Falcon CPU really play that much of a difference in any follow-up movie?
The only thing, what's funny is they talk about well, it's got all the maps, it's the biggest charted whatever guidance system. It's well, okay, I guess you found Like, the only time that they ever really look for something is in Empire Strikes Back when they're looking for a place to go. And it's not like Bespin or Cloud City is, like, hidden. And then clearly it wasn't mapped well enough to find Octo, or else, we would have found Luke in like 5 minutes. So it is just like, I don't know. It's like the Millennium Falcon also doesn't seem like it goes, like it charts a course for hyperspace any faster than any other ship in Star Wars. So it's just like, it's such a throwaway thing that it's like, oh, and now you know why the Falcon's so good at navigation. Like, sick. Nowhere did you ever tell me it was the best at navigation, though. You know,
I just assumed a lot of the navigation came from, the navigator flying it.
Yeah.
I took this as like a really bad attempt to have an Iron Man Jarvis without the talking or the sarcasm.
Like, you're right, but it's like, well, guys, you can't go back and have her be Jarvis in the other movies because you haven't done it. There's 8 movies where that ship doesn't talk.
They realize they've had her muted the whole time.
She's like, let me out.
Oh crap, we had the volume down. Oh, sorry about that.
But like for every kind of weird thing like that where I'm like, why did you do that? There are like fun Easter eggs that as a Star Wars super fan, like I was like, oh neat. Like I think the one line that made me like kind of smile like a dope was Kira takes out all those guards on the Kessel, and Beckett's like, where'd you learn how to do that? Or someone asked her that, and she's like, oh, I was trained in Terras Kasi. I'm like, Star Wars Terras Kasi was that weird Mortal Kombat Star Wars game for PlayStation 1 when I was in like 7th grade. Do you remember that game?
Vaguely. I don't remember much about it other than name, but I remember playing it.
There's also like the fish that they eat Dryden Voss offers them is the fish from episode 1 in Utaganga. Like, there's tons of like little teeny blink and you miss it. There's I guess spoiler alert. I don't know. It's either someone was lazy and recycled or it's deliberate, but one of the upcoming the Knights of Ren, one of their like staffs or weapons is actually hanging on Dryden Voss's wall in this movie. Yeah, so like there's a lot of cool stuff like that. But again, yeah, for every Terras Kasi, there is like a weird dice. Like, stop trying to make the dice a thing, man. You hit it really hard in Last Jedi, and then you hit it again here. I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah, I love Easter eggs as a super fan, but at the same time, as time goes on, I'm actually starting to dislike them, especially in the Star Wars world. And this, I'm sure, opens up a whole nother discussion with Last Jedi and Rey's parentage and all this other stuff. The more Easter eggs we have, the more connected everything is, which on paper sounds great until you realize, unless you are in this connection, this franchise has no room for you whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm actually incredibly curious because as of this recording, Disney Plus is still a couple weeks away. I'm interested to see if The Mandalorian is the first to truly buck the trend of, it's got to connect some way, somehow. Because, the Clone Wars cartoon is all about Anakin and Obi-Wan, and even Star Wars Rebels, Lando and Leia and, Obi-Wan, all of them find their way into it at some point. Mandalorian looks truly standalone, but let's talk about perhaps the biggest Easter egg. I don't even know if you can call it Easter egg, but it's the best transition I could think of, which is at the very end. The whole time Paul Bettany is saying, you think, I still answer to someone, even though I'm in charge, I still answer to someone. And we find out that someone, the head of the Crimson Dawn criminal empire, is Maul. Not Darth Maul, because he drops the Darth in the Clone Wars cartoon. He is just Maul. What were your thoughts when you saw this? I think my theater was half cheers, half, huh?
I think that's a good reflection of my theater as well. I pop seeing it. I'm like, oh my God, Darth Maul, that's awesome. Again, all connecting everything, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know. I guess if nothing else, I was more worried that this meant more Darth Maul on screen, which hypothetically sounds good, but the way Disney has been, at least around that time with their properties, I was really nervous they're going to ruin that character too.
Yeah, So here's where I stand, because I'm a mega Star Wars fan in the sense that like I read a lot of the books. I've watched all the Clone Wars. I watched all the Rebels. I'm trying to get through Resistance, even though it's not my favorite. But they gave Darth Maul, or Maul now, a huge part to play in both the Clone Wars and Rebels. And he has a very moving ending, and as a character, his final death is a rematch with Obi-Wan in Star Wars Rebels. So there is a window of time where you're just like, and then he went off and did something, but then he came back for Obi-Wan. So it makes sense in that sense of like, okay, he was doing something. But that being said, like, it can't, whatever he does with Crimson Dawn as a continuity junkie of Star Wars, it can't be that substantial, because either he gets kicked out or he drops it in favor of going after Obi-Wan shortly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that entirely. It's, to me, it's trying too hard to link everything together. Maybe I would have, and we still don't know Kira's motives completely. But her just staying there and not following Han at the end, just reporting in, maybe we don't see who that somebody is. I don't know, but I like that hook, that twist more than outright telling us it's Maul in this role. And I don't know, there was just, to me, it just seemed like he was included just for inclusion.
Yeah, well, it was you're not wrong, because it didn't really say in the script who it was, and there were a couple characters that they tossed around, but there were some that were very adamant that it be Maul. So it did feel very like, what Star Wars character could we throw in here? And you know what? As much as I like Maul, like, now there is like, okay, now I have to go back to my huge Maul timeline and see where this could have happened. Maybe it would have been fun. Maybe it wouldn't have gotten as big of a reaction, but maybe it would have been fun to give it to like one of the bounty hunters from Empire Strikes Back that, like, but you don't know, like IG-88 or Bosk or Dengar, like one of those guys that didn't have any lines, but you bought the action figure when you were 8 because it just looked cool,
Is Bosk the one that's confirmed for The Mandalorian?
I don't know if he is. I honestly don't know if any of the OG ones that we know. There is one that looks like IG-88, but it's a different IG number or model. So
I thought I read something, and this was also at the very early stages of production, so he could have been cut by then, but I thought I read somewhere that Bosk was going to be included, not as a main character, but a reoccurring one in The Mandalorian, and we'll find out sooner than later, I guess.
I would be happy with that, because I think, like I said, I read a lot of the books, not all of them, but as far as, like, I can't keep up with the comics. There's just too many. But like a lot of those bounty hunters just there aren't as many expectations. I think if, like, for God's sakes, even if like Boba Fett had showed up instead of Maul, you would have been like, oh, cool, that's where he was before A New Hope. But with Darth Maul, the reason why I like, as much as like I'm like, what a cool reveal, but also why that feels so clunky, they literally have to ignite his lightsaber. So you're like, yeah, that's the same guy. It's not someone that looks like him. It's not someone that's the same species, but it's not him. Like, it is him, and he has mechanical legs. And they have to get all this information out in like a visual way, and it just comes off so weird,
Yeah, it's like, was he threatening her with that, or he's fidgety, he's got a little bit of anxiety, Maul does, so he just needs to play with his lightsaber all the time? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lightsaber fidget spinner.
Perfect.
So yeah, like, in theory, I like the idea, because I'm like, oh, cool. That means if they do like a Crimson Dawn kind of story, that we get to see Maul again. But ultimately, like you said, it's the prequel thing where it's like, but I know that ultimately, this isn't going to be too big of an endeavor for him, because he is going to go back and try to hunt down Obi-Wan one last time.
Yeah, although that hook with Kira at the end is intriguing, regardless of how I would have presented it. I'm curious, does she go more evil? Does she have a saving moment before she passes? Is she still alive in the current universe?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, is if she's still alive, and if not hooked up like in a romantic way, but imagine, we now know that there's a period of time after episode 6 where Han and Leia, maybe they don't divorce, but they separate for sure. If he saw her again, that must have been an awkward conversation, one that I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for.
Yeah, so at least there's possibility with her character to kind of see where things are going, and that doesn't have to be as connected either. Much like The Mandalorian, it kind of can do its own thing if they choose to go that route, but all in all, I mean, I enjoy the movie. I think I like it more the more I watch it over time, but for after all is said and done, it still doesn't feel epic like a Star Wars movie should.
I don't disagree with you. I think that's maybe a little bit why I do tend to like it. It's a little bit easier of a watch. I love The Last Jedi, but The Last Jedi, it is this epic commitment. I can't just put it on in the background. There, every sequence, even the ones that are super cool, like that lightsaber fight, it's not just oh, that's a fun sequence. That's a powerful, emotional, huge sequence. And that's kind of what that whole movie is. So I feel like Solo to me is a little bit more of a return to just the adventure rather than the kind of the dramatic soap opera aspect of it. I do want to say, I think this movie is beautifully shot. The technical craft of this movie doesn't get enough credit. The fact that Ron Howard built the cockpit and then did old school kind of projection screens so that they could feel like they were really in the Falcon, that's all really cool and it looks really good.
I agree and I appreciated that more in future viewings as well. To stop knowing what's expected, you could stop and look at everything else a little bit more, and the cinematography and the special effects, even the hokey CGI characters were not as bad as I would really expect them to be.
The only thing that someone brought this to my attention and now I can't not think about it, it's by the end of this movie, it's 10 years until A New Hope. The inside, at least, of the Millennium Falcon is still pretty pristine. Does Han just literally smear feces on the wall in the next 10 years to get it as dirty as it is by the time it's in A New Hope?
I think that's probably more of a Chewbacca thing, personally, but I suppose at this point, neither of them are going to be want to be the one that has to clean the joint. So, yeah, I assume just 10 years of being dirty bachelors will do that to them.
How bad does the Millennium Falcon smell in A New Hope?
What are the quality of the ventilation systems?
Right. Yeah. But it was fun kind of seeing the Falcon in its pristine, what it was meant to be, because that now you kind of realize, by the time A New Hope comes around, you've been told that's a crappy ship, but you're oh, I kind of like it. I think it's neat. But then when you see oh, this was a Rolls Royce that someone just beat into the ground. Now I get showing up to the Death Star in a 1985 Hyundai. Of course that's going to be what are you doing? This is what you brought. But I loved seeing it. I loved kind of the jettison of the escape pod, so then it finally looked like the ship that we knew. That was all cool. There's just a lot of cool stuff in this. I don't think it's the best Star Wars movie. I don't think it breaks any new ground, but it does bum me out that a lot of people just didn't go see it.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said many times, I agree, but to me it was also a wake-up call to Disney and Lucasfilm that maybe the specialty of Star Wars is the fact that we don't get one or two every single year, that it is an event, something that we look forward and plan for, rather than have expectations where we want one or we want two every single year. So in a weird way, I'm happy it bombed, because it did force them to reevaluate their business strategy, and there's not a Star Wars fatigue lined up for the next few years.
Yeah, I think there are a handful of factors that went into this. Do I think that, the people who hated Last Jedi and say that tanked this movie, maybe a fraction I certainly don't think that like you can point the finger to Last Jedi satisfaction or dissatisfaction as like the culprit. I do agree with you. I think that we kind of take for granted, especially, in LA and here in this industry, in this business. I said this on the Deadpool 2 episode. I think we take for granted it's like, yeah, when a new movie comes out, you just go watch it. And it's like for a lot of people, a lot of families, there's maybe 2-3 movies that they'll see as a family a year. And by that point, especially if you're on a budget, you just saw Infinity War and Deadpool 2 is coming out. And here comes another Star Wars. It's like, yeah, well, we already saw Star Wars this year, and it wasn't my favorite. So I'm going to actually just put my money towards, because I really want to see Deadpool 2, or I really got to see Avengers. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think that happens more than you think. And I think you're right. I think that's a combination of things. I think that's Star Wars not feeling special enough that it had to see. I think that was dissatisfaction from Last Jedi playing a small part, and also just it was too soon. I honestly felt like I was missing something last Christmas when there wasn't a Star Wars movie.
I love that you bring that up about families and stuff, because I think that's another part of fandom that people fail to realize. And even then, I've unfortunately or fortunately, I've lived and hopped around the country many times in my adult life, living in LA, not too far from Billy for a little bit. And then, I'm back in central Illinois now. I'm in the Midwest, where we only have one theater chain in town. It's AMC Theaters is all we have. There's 3 of them, and all 3 show the exact same movies. There is no variety here, so we're stuck being shown what is being shown. And with that said, within the last 2 years, one theater finally got an IMAX, and another theater finally got reclinable chairs and alcohol. This area is not a big cinema consuming area. So I go to the movies all the time. I'm part of the AMC A-list, the new version of Movie Pass, where I go see multiple movies a week and I enjoy it. But I go to talk about these things, and it's amazing how people are like, oh, I didn't know there was a new Zombieland. Oh, I didn't know there was a new Star Wars coming out. And for me, that boggles my mind. Like, how do you not know this? But out here, that's not priority.
Yeah, and I definitely think that unfortunately, just with the late marketing, didn't we just see a Star Wars? This one kind of slipped under the radar. And it's funny because I do know a handful of people that did not see this in theater for one reason or another, caught it when it came out on digital or rented it from Redbox. They're like, hey, that wasn't that bad. I kind of liked it.
I was just talking to somebody the other day, and somebody's like, oh, what are you doing this weekend? So I gave a list of what I was doing. And I'm like, and I'm going to be guesting on a podcast. Oh, what's the theme of the podcast? Well, we're going to be talking Solo, a Star Wars film. Or I just said, we're seeing Solo. And then I sent a follow-up message. Oh, it's a Star Wars movie. And the person's like, oh, I know. I am a huge Star Wars fan. It's so funny that you think that I don't know what Solo is. I haven't seen it, but I know what it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's still a handful of quote-unquote big Star Wars fans that just haven't given this one a chance yet. And I do wonder if, time will be a little bit kinder to this one. Like I said, this had 70% Rotten Tomatoes, A- cinema score. Like, for the most part, people walked out like, yeah, that was fun. I liked that. That was a fun Star Wars movie. And I wonder if kind of like as time goes by, as it becomes available on Disney Plus, so you don't have to like go out of your way to find it, if this one will pick up a little bit of an audience. Because I think it would be cool if, the streaming numbers, I don't know how the ratings for streaming works, but if it comes back like, oh, a lot of people are watching Solo, maybe we should do something,
I am also curious if further Star Wars series or movies or whatever, I'm curious if they're going to try to link back more things to Solo, a la Avengers Endgame. Try to lend that credibility to Thor: The Dark World amongst other movies that we were like, okay, not a big deal. I wonder if they will try to redeem Solo a bit by adding more of a influence on Paul Bettany's character or Kira or somebody of that nature.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that like you said, it was a blessing in disguise, unfortunately, because this did make Disney reevaluate. And I think Disney Plus is going to be such a champion of Star Wars. And then when there are movies, because there will be movies again, but I think that's where it will feel like a big event, like, the big Star Wars movie is coming. But in the meantime, for people like me that do like to consume a lot of the, the side stuff, like, there'll be a healthy diet there, and then there'll be the big movies. And you're right. I think it was tough for them to learn that, like, hey, Marvel is a different beast altogether. Anyone that tries to copy Marvel, be it DC, be it Star Wars, be it Universal's Dark Monsters, as you said, like, you just can't. They captured lightning in a bottle. It's a fool's errand to try to do again.
They played the long game, and everybody else, when trying the Marvel approach, doesn't plan the long game, or they plan the long game at the behest of the current game, and Star Wars shouldn't be that way anyway. Star Wars has always been one of the biggest, most recognizable brands in cinematic history. Don't try to reinvent the wheel on this one. Just keep it going, and that's what's going to keep it alive on screen and in our hearts for decades to come for our kids and their kids' kids.
Mr. Mo Lightning, you said it better than I could ever wrap this up. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that I finally got to talk with you about this one, and you're doing a lot of cool stuff, some stuff around like mental health awareness and stuff. Where can the people talk to you, find out more, get your movie opinions, get your opinions about everything else?
Finally, after many long battles with Facebook, every one of my socials is consistent now, at Mo Lightning, M-O Lightning, all one word. So reach out to me anywhere, say hi, as Billy said. And I'm very big. I'm growing in the suicide prevention community due to my own struggles and whatnot over my life. So that's a new cause that I'm diving into. So if you want to be a part of that cause, I would appreciate it. If not, keep supporting Billy. He is one of the best talents I've ever worked with in my life. Billy, thank you for having me on today.
I kind of don't even know how to end this when you're complimentary to me. I'm waiting for the rug to be pulled out here.
Billy, you're a son of a bitch.
There it is. Thank you guys so much for listening. Coming next week, Hector Navarro. I know this is going to sound crazy. Hear me out. Hector Navarro and I are talking about why I think D3, that's right, Mighty Ducks 3 is the best of one of the weirdest trilogies ever made. Stick around. I will see you guys next week.